What if the attack didn't come from a stranger, but from the ones you hug, trust, and pray with? What if the enemy wasn't wearing horns, but a familiar face, using love as a mask while spiritually draining your destiny? Witchcraft doesn't always come with candles and potions. It comes through control, guilt, manipulation, and emotional domination. The most dangerous warfare is the one you don't recognize because it's operating through someone you love. Not all love is clean. Some love comes with chains. Witchcraft can wear the face of loyalty, but carry the agenda of control. Emotional manipulation is a weapon, especially in familiar hands. Spiritual discernment is not suspicion, it's survival. The enemy often enters through open doors we never thought to guard. Tonight we expose what's been hiding in plain sight. Hidden forces of influence. We often think of influence in obvious terms. People influencing us through direct communication, actions, or advice. But what if influence doesn't always appear in the form we expect? Hidden forces of influence are often operating beneath the surface of our everyday experiences, shaping our decisions, attitudes, and even our destinies without us being fully aware of it. These forces can be subtle and insidious, moving quietly through the fabric of our lives, and at times they can exert far more power than we recognize. One of the most profound examples of hidden forces at work is how societal norms shape our thinking and behavior. These norms, although often presented as common sense, are not inherently natural to us. They are learned, and they shape how we see ourselves and others. From the moment we are born, we are immersed in a cultural environment that tells us how to think, how to behave, what to value, and what to reject. These external influences can subtly infiltrate our minds and hearts, creating a lens through which we view the world, one that is tinted by the beliefs and values of those around us. In this sense, we are not merely living out our own desires or choices. We are often responding to external forces that are pushing us in certain directions. These forces are not always visible or recognized, but they can manifest in every aspect of life. From the media we consume to the expectations placed upon us by our families and peers. We may think we are making independent decisions, but in reality, we are often under the sway of these hidden forces, which shape our desires, goals, and priorities without our conscious realization. Another example of hidden forces at work is the way in which our own subconscious mind operates. Much of what we do is not driven by conscious thought, but by patterns and beliefs that are deeply ingrained in us from past experiences. These subconscious beliefs may stem from childhood, from cultural conditioning, or from traumatic events we may not even fully remember. Yet they continue to influence our behaviors and choices long after the events that caused them have passed. These subconscious forces are powerful. They can shape the way we interact with others, the way we handle stress, and even how we perceive opportunities. For example, a person who grew up in an environment where love was conditional, only given when certain achievements or behaviors were met, may subconsciously seek validation in unhealthy ways throughout their adult life. They may feel unworthy of love unless they meet specific conditions, even if they consciously tell themselves they no longer need validation. This hidden force of influence drives their behavior, often sabotaging their relationships and personal growth without their awareness. The hidden forces of influence also operate in the spiritual realm. We often hear of spiritual warfare and the idea that unseen forces can affect our lives, pushing us toward decisions or situations that seem to be beyond our control. These forces can operate through negative emotions such as fear, bitterness, and resentment, which latch onto our spirit and guide our actions in destructive directions. These spiritual forces work to weaken us from the inside, convincing us that we are powerless or unworthy, preventing us from living out our true purpose. On a broader scale, cultural ideologies, economic systems, and even political environments exert influence on the way we live our lives. The hidden forces of these systems can be so embedded in our daily routines and the structure of society that we often fail to see them. These systems influence our choices, aspirations, and even our relationships, often without us realizing the full extent of their impact. Take, for example, the rise of consumerism. The advertising industry has become one of the most potent hidden forces of influence in modern society. Through advertisements, we are subtly encouraged to value possessions, status, and outward appearances, leading us to place our worth in material things instead of inner growth or spiritual fulfillment. Moreover, our relationships themselves can be sources of hidden influence. Sometimes the people we care about most can have an influence over us that is so deeply embedded in our hearts that we can't see it for what it truly is. Loved ones, friends, and even colleagues can inadvertently manipulate our thoughts and actions through guilt, expectation, or unspoken desires. They might not always have malicious intent, but their influence can cause us to make decisions that align with their values, not our own. It can be easy to think we are simply being kind or loyal, but over time, this hidden influence can lead us to neglect our own needs, desires, and goals in favor of meeting the needs of others. Ultimately, the hidden forces of influence are pervasive and multifaceted. They operate within the systems we navigate, the relationships we build, and the very minds we carry. They shape how we perceive the world, how we see ourselves, and how we relate to others. Recognizing these forces is the first step in understanding their power. Once we become aware of the subtle ways they affect our lives, we can take steps to reclaim our autonomy and ensure that our actions are driven by our true values, not by external pressures or unseen forces. Awareness and discernment are key. Only by identifying these hidden influences can we begin to navigate life in a way that is truly authentic, purposeful, and in alignment with our highest calling. The power of familiar spirits. Familiar spirits are a mysterious and powerful force in the spiritual world, often operating under the radar and influencing our thoughts, emotions, and decisions. They are not always as easy to recognize as other spiritual entities because their work is subtle and their presence can sometimes seem benign or even beneficial. However, the influence of familiar spirits is dangerous, for they know us intimately. They are not foreign to our lives. Instead, they are familiar, hence the name. These spirits have access to our history, our weaknesses, and our past experiences, which they use to manipulate and control our thoughts and actions. At their core, familiar spirits are spiritual entities that attach themselves to individuals, families, or even generations. They gain power from the patterns of behavior, thoughts, and emotions that have been established over time. These spirits are not necessarily demons, but they carry a negative influence, often operating through inherited family traits, past traumas, or deep-seated fears. They are capable of feeding off of unresolved issues, using them to reinforce negative cycles in a person's life. One of the key aspects of familiar spirits is their ability to manipulate the human mind and spirit through the use of past experiences. They thrive on familiarity. The spirit of a past trauma, a painful memory, or a long-standing fear can be a doorway for a familiar spirit to enter and take control. For example, someone who has experienced deep rejection in childhood may unknowingly open the door for a familiar spirit of rejection to take root in their life. This spirit constantly whispers lies that reinforce feelings of unworthiness, isolation, or fear of being rejected again. It operates through negative thoughts and emotional triggers that are tied to that past pain. In families, familiar spirits often operate generationally. This is why certain patterns or behaviors seem to repeat in families from one generation to the next. These spirits take advantage of unresolved issues passed down through bloodlines, feeding off of anger, bitterness, addiction, or unhealthy relationship dynamics. For example, alcoholism may be present in one generation, and then the next generation may struggle with the same addiction, unaware that it's being fueled by the power of familiar spirits that have been lurking in the family line. These spirits can also thrive on the energy of our relationships. Close relationships, especially those that are emotionally charged or complex, can open doors for familiar spirits to work through loved ones. This is particularly true when there are unresolved issues, secrets, or hidden emotional wounds within a relationship. A familiar spirit may attach itself to someone we love, influencing their behavior in ways that can directly impact us. It may cause them to act out of jealousy, bitterness, or insecurity, and over time this will affect how we interact with them. What starts as a small problem can escalate, and we may find ourselves constantly battling with negative emotions or relational struggles, unaware that a familiar spirit is pulling the strings. The power of familiar spirits can be especially destructive because they feed on our vulnerability. They exploit our fears, insecurities, and wounds, strengthening their hold over us by continually reinforcing negative thoughts. For instance, if a person has suffered a betrayal, the familiar spirit of betrayal may begin to amplify that trauma, causing the individual to perceive every interaction or relationship as a potential threat. This not only disrupts their ability to form healthy relationships, but also keeps them in a constant state of fear and suspicion. Furthermore, familiar spirits often use people close to us as their vehicle of influence. This can include family members, friends, or even mentors who unknowingly serve as conduits for these negative spiritual forces. The spirit may cause a loved one to act in ways that seem out of character, prompting them to say things that are hurtful or to behave in ways that seem manipulative or controlling. This creates confusion and tension, and those affected may feel torn between their love for the individual and the strange, negative feelings they are experiencing. As powerful as familiar spirits can be, they are not invincible. Once recognized, these spirits can be challenged and removed. However, the first step in overcoming them is understanding their nature and their tactics. Familiar spirits thrive on ignorance and unawareness, and as long as we remain unaware of their influence, they continue to operate under the surface. Awareness is crucial because it empowers us to break free from their grip. To break free from the influence of familiar spirits, we must first recognize their presence. We must ask ourselves why certain patterns keep repeating, why we continually struggle with the same emotional triggers, or why certain relationships are always fraught with tension. Once we acknowledge that there is a spiritual force at work, we can begin to take action. This may involve confronting past traumas, renouncing unhealthy familial patterns, and breaking generational cycles. In some cases, this may require prayer, spiritual warfare, and a conscious decision to sever ties with the familiar spirits that have operated through us and our loved ones. Familiar spirits are powerful because they operate in the realm of the familiar. They are comfortable, hidden in the areas of our lives that feel safe or normal. They thrive on the things we don't confront and the emotions we bury deep within us. But once we become aware of their power and influence, we have the ability to rise above their manipulation and claim freedom. Breaking free from familiar spirits isn't a one-time event. It is a process of constant vigilance and renewal as we learn to overcome the influences of the past and walk in the fullness of our true spiritual identity. Words as tools of manipulation. Words are one of the most powerful tools in human interaction. They have the ability to build, to destroy, to heal, and to hurt. But beyond their obvious functions, words can also be used as instruments of manipulation, deliberately crafted to influence, control, or deceive others. Words, when wielded with skill and intention, can be used to shape perception, control behavior, and alter the course of decisions in ways that are not immediately obvious to the person being affected. At the heart of this manipulation lies the understanding that words carry weight. They hold meaning, but they also carry an emotional and psychological power that can be used to steer individuals towards certain beliefs or actions. When used manipulatively, words can create confusion, sow seeds of doubt, or trigger emotional responses that cloud judgment. The most insidious form of manipulation through words is when the listener or recipient is unaware of the power being exercised over them. It is not always the overt lies or aggressive language that manipulate. Sometimes it's the subtle, carefully chosen words that tap into deeper insecurities, fears, or desires. One way words are used as tools of manipulation is through gaslighting. Gaslighting is a psychological tactic used to make someone doubt their own perceptions, memories, or reality. It involves the strategic use of words to create confusion and cause the person to question their sanity or understanding of a situation. A manipulative person may repeatedly deny facts, twist the truth, or make the other person feel like they are overreacting or imagining things. Over time, this wears down the victim's confidence in their own judgment, making them more susceptible to the manipulator's influence. Words in this case become a weapon, slowly eroding the victim's sense of self and their ability to trust their own perceptions. Words also have the power to create division and distrust. By selectively using language, a manipulator can frame a situation in a way that causes people to feel divided or suspicious of each other. For example, in relationships or even in larger societal contexts, a manipulative individual may use words to create an us versus them mentality. They may use phrases like "they don't understand you" or "they only care about themselves," subtly driving a wedge between people who were once close. These words make the listener feel isolated and unsupported, pushing them to rely on the manipulator for validation or a sense of belonging. In some cases, words are used to flatter or excessively praise someone in order to gain their trust or manipulate them into a certain behavior. This is often seen in toxic relationships where the manipulator uses praise as a tool to get what they want. Compliments and admiration are strategically placed to make the person feel good about themselves, creating a false sense of closeness and affection. This is often followed by subtle requests or demands that seem harmless but ultimately serve the manipulator's agenda. The victim, feeling appreciated and valued, may not realize that their kindness is being exploited for selfish gain. Furthermore, words can be used to control the narrative. By framing a story in a particular light, a person can manipulate the way others perceive events or individuals. This can happen on a personal level in relationships where one party controls the conversation and dictates how the other person's actions are interpreted. But it also happens in larger scales, like in politics or the media, where language is crafted to shape public opinion. Politicians, for example, often use emotionally charged language to rally support or create fear, ensuring that their message is received in a way that fits their agenda. The careful selection of words can turn public sentiment, making people more likely to align with a specific cause or position. In addition to this, manipulative language often plays on vulnerability and fear. Words can be crafted to tap into a person's deepest fears, insecurities, and emotional wounds. For example, a manipulative person may use phrases like, "If you really loved me, you would do this," or "everyone will think you're weak if you don't comply," pressuring the victim into submission by exploiting their fear of rejection or failure. Words such as these play on vulnerability, forcing individuals to make decisions based on emotional reactions rather than rational thought. This manipulation through language is not always done with malicious intent. Sometimes it is unconscious. People may use words that are designed to manipulate out of habit, insecurity, or a lack of self-awareness. This is why it's important to be mindful of the language we use. A simple comment or offhand remark, though unintentional, can have far-reaching consequences if the recipient perceives it as manipulative or controlling. It's not always about what is said, but how it is heard and internalized. The ability to manipulate through words also relies on the power of repetition. Repeating a certain phrase or narrative over time ingrains it in the listener's mind, making it feel like truth. Repetition is used in advertising, media, and even in interpersonal relationships to reinforce specific ideas or beliefs. Over time, constant exposure to a particular narrative causes individuals to accept it as fact, even if it is not true. This kind of linguistic manipulation can subtly alter the course of people's beliefs, opinions, and actions without them even realizing it. Ultimately, words are not just tools for communication, they are instruments of influence. When used with intention, they have the power to alter the course of decisions, shape perceptions, and control behavior. Whether through gaslighting, selective framing, or emotional manipulation, words can be used as a tool for control. The key to protecting ourselves from such manipulation lies in our ability to recognize the power that language holds and to become more discerning about the words we listen to and the words we use. By understanding how words can be wielded as tools of manipulation, we can begin to take control of the narratives that shape our lives and ensure that we are not unknowingly manipulated by the language around us. Emotional control and manipulation. Emotions are powerful drivers of human behavior. They can motivate us to take action, to connect with others, or to retreat from a situation. However, emotions can also be used as a tool of manipulation, especially when they are exploited by those with an intention to control, dominate, or influence others. Emotional manipulation is a subtle yet potent form of control, one that can leave deep psychological marks on individuals. It is often difficult to detect because it exploits the very nature of human vulnerability, our capacity to feel, care, and respond to the emotional cues of others. Emotional control and manipulation are tactics often used in toxic relationships, whether in personal, professional, or even societal contexts. It involves the strategic use of emotions to influence the thoughts, actions, and decisions of others. In this dynamic, the manipulator uses emotional responses as leverage, creating an imbalance of power that leaves the victim feeling helpless, uncertain, and often dependent on the manipulator for validation or security. One of the most common tactics of emotional manipulation is guilt tripping. Guilt is one of the most powerful emotional tools used by manipulators. By making someone feel responsible for the manipulator's pain, disappointment, or unhappiness, the manipulator can create a sense of obligation or duty in the victim. For example, a manipulative partner might say, "If you loved me, you would do this for me," or "I'm so disappointed in you." The implication is that the person is causing the manipulator emotional distress, and this forces the victim to act in order to relieve the guilt. Over time, this manipulation erodes the victim's sense of autonomy, as they feel they must constantly cater to the emotional needs of the manipulator to avoid feelings of guilt. Another form of emotional manipulation is playing on fear. Fear is a primal emotion that can paralyze or motivate, and manipulators know how to use it to their advantage. A common tactic is to instill a fear of abandonment or rejection, often through threats or subtle insinuations. A manipulator may say things like, "If you leave me, you'll never find someone who loves you like I do," or "No one else will put up with you." These words tap into the fear of loneliness and being unloved, coercing the victim into staying in a relationship or situation out of fear of the consequences. Fear-based emotional manipulation can make the victim feel trapped, unable to make decisions freely without considering the possible emotional fallout. In many cases, emotional manipulation also involves the use of affection and love as tools for control. This is often referred to as love bombing and is typically seen in the early stages of toxic relationships. A manipulator might shower their target with excessive praise, gifts, or affection, creating a feeling of emotional dependence. Once the victim is emotionally invested, the manipulator then begins to withdraw their affection or act in ways that cause the victim to feel unworthy or insecure. This creates an emotional roller coaster that keeps the victim attached, always striving to regain the affection or approval that was once freely given. The manipulator's control over the victim's emotions becomes the source of power in the relationship. Another critical aspect of emotional manipulation is the strategic use of silence or withdrawal. This technique is often referred to as the silent treatment, and it is a form of emotional abuse that is designed to make the victim feel confused, ignored, or invisible. When a manipulator withdraws emotionally, they force the other person to chase after their approval or attention. This leads to a cycle where the victim constantly seeks validation or affection, feeling emotionally insecure and anxious. Silence becomes a weapon in the hands of the manipulator, undermining the victim's sense of self-worth and making them question their own value. What makes emotional manipulation particularly harmful is its ability to create confusion. Often the manipulator will use a technique called gaslighting, where they manipulate the victim into doubting their own emotions, thoughts, or perceptions. For instance, when the victim expresses their feelings of hurt, the manipulator might say, "You're overreacting," or "You're too sensitive." Over time, this causes the victim to question their own emotional responses and lose confidence in their ability to discern reality. Gaslighting is a form of emotional control that is deeply disorienting, as it makes the victim feel like their emotions are invalid or unreasonable. In toxic dynamics, emotional manipulation may also involve triangulation. This occurs when the manipulator brings in a third party to create jealousy, competition, or emotional insecurity. For example, a manipulative person may talk about someone else they admire or claim that someone else is better in order to make the victim feel inferior or inadequate. This manipulative tactic shifts the emotional focus onto the third party, causing the victim to compete for attention, affection, or approval. It creates an environment of emotional competition which keeps the victim in a constant state of uncertainty and doubt. Perhaps one of the most damaging elements of emotional manipulation is its long-term effects. Unlike more overt forms of abuse, emotional manipulation is often gradual and insidious. It can take years for the victim to recognize the extent of the emotional damage that has been done. Over time, they may become emotionally drained, unable to trust their own feelings, or dependent on the manipulator for emotional validation. This creates a cycle that is difficult to break, as the victim may believe that their emotional needs are only valid when met by the manipulator. Recognizing emotional control and manipulation is crucial for reclaiming one's emotional autonomy. Often the first step in breaking free from manipulation is acknowledging the signs and patterns of emotional control. Understanding that these tactics are used to gain power and maintain dominance can empower individuals to take action to protect themselves. Setting boundaries, seeking support from trusted individuals, and working with a therapist or counselor can help individuals regain control over their emotional lives and rebuild their sense of self-worth. Emotional control and manipulation are among the most potent forms of psychological manipulation because they exploit our deepest desires for connection, love, and approval. The key to protecting oneself from these tactics lies in awareness, self-care, and the courage to confront toxic dynamics. It is essential to recognize when emotions are being used as tools of manipulation and to take steps toward healing and reclaiming emotional sovereignty. The spirit of rejection. The spirit of rejection is one of the most insidious forces that can shape a person's emotional and psychological well-being. It is a force that subtly invades the heart and mind, causing individuals to feel alienated, unworthy, or unwanted. Rejection, at its core, is a painful experience, whether it occurs in relationships, professional settings, or personal endeavors. However, when rejection is internalized and becomes a deep-rooted emotional state, it transforms into something far more powerful and damaging. This internalized rejection, often referred to as the spirit of rejection, manifests as a persistent belief that one is unworthy of love, acceptance, or success, and it can have profound consequences on a person's self-esteem, relationships, and overall mental health. The spirit of rejection often takes root in early childhood when a person experiences abandonment, neglect, or exclusion from significant figures in their life. These experiences can be direct, such as a parent's emotional withdrawal or physical absence, or indirect, like being overlooked or criticized by peers. Over time, these early experiences form a belief system that says, "I am not good enough," or "I do not belong." These beliefs become the lens through which the individual views themselves and the world around them. They begin to expect rejection in all areas of life, and as a result, they may withdraw from opportunities, avoid deep connections, or self-sabotage before they can be rejected. The spirit of rejection also thrives on negative self-talk. The mind becomes a battleground where a constant stream of self-critical thoughts reinforces the belief that one is not worthy of love, success, or happiness. This negative self-talk often goes unnoticed, but it continuously chips away at self-esteem and confidence. A person with the spirit of rejection may believe that no matter what they achieve or how hard they try, they will never be good enough. This internal dialogue can prevent them from pursuing their dreams, forming healthy relationships, or taking risks that could lead to personal growth. One of the most profound impacts of the spirit of rejection is its ability to distort one's perception of others. When someone has experienced rejection in the past, they may project these feelings onto others. This often leads to a heightened sensitivity to perceived slights or rejections, even when none is intended. For example, a person with a spirit of rejection may misinterpret someone's neutral comment as criticism or assume that a lack of attention is a sign of being unwanted. These misinterpretations create a cycle of defensiveness and insecurity, making it difficult for the individual to trust others or form genuine connections. Furthermore, the spirit of rejection can create a fear of intimacy. If a person believes that they are destined to be rejected, they may keep others at a distance to protect themselves from the pain of emotional hurt. This fear of intimacy can manifest in many forms, from avoiding close relationships altogether to engaging in shallow or surface-level connections that never allow for true emotional vulnerability. Over time, this fear can lead to isolation, loneliness, and a sense of emotional emptiness. The person may desperately crave love and acceptance, but remain unable to fully open themselves up to the possibility of connection. The spirit of rejection can also be a driving force behind perfectionism. Those who struggle with the spirit of rejection often feel that they must be perfect in order to gain acceptance or avoid rejection. This can lead to an intense fear of failure and an overwhelming pressure to perform at an impossibly high standard. No matter how much they achieve, perfectionists with a spirit of rejection will always feel that they fall short, and their sense of worth remains tied to their ability to meet these unattainable standards. This creates a cycle of constant striving, self-criticism, and emotional exhaustion. Moreover, the spirit of rejection can fuel a tendency to seek validation from others in unhealthy ways. People who feel rejected may constantly seek external approval to fill the void within. They may overcompensate by trying to please others, often at the cost of their own well-being. This can lead to a pattern of codependency, where the individual's sense of self-worth is entirely dependent on the approval or affection of others. In extreme cases, this need for validation can become a form of manipulation, where the individual unconsciously seeks to control the emotions and reactions of those around them to ensure their own acceptance. This destructive pattern can also manifest in unhealthy relationships. Those who struggle with rejection may attract people who reinforce their beliefs of unworthiness. For example, they may find themselves in relationships where they are continually belittled or emotionally abused. These toxic dynamics feed into the spirit of rejection, convincing the individual that they are not deserving of respect, kindness, or love. Over time, this creates a sense of emotional paralysis, where the person becomes trapped in a cycle of accepting subpar treatment because they believe they are not worthy of anything better. The spirit of rejection does not just affect individuals on an emotional or relational level, it also impacts their ability to achieve personal and professional success. People with a deep-rooted fear of rejection often struggle with self-confidence, which can hinder their ability to take risks or pursue new opportunities. They may be afraid of failure or judgment, causing them to hold back from reaching their full potential. This fear can also manifest as procrastination or self-sabotage, where the individual avoids completing tasks or projects due to the belief that they will inevitably fail or be rejected. To overcome the spirit of rejection, it is crucial to recognize its presence and understand how it operates in one's life. Healing begins with acknowledging the negative beliefs and emotional patterns that have been formed as a result of past rejection. This requires a willingness to confront the painful memories and experiences that have shaped one's sense of self-worth. It also involves learning to replace negative self-talk with positive affirmations and adopting a healthier perspective on relationships and success. Building self-worth from within is another key component of healing. Rather than relying on external validation, individuals with a spirit of rejection must learn to cultivate a sense of value that is not dependent on the approval or acceptance of others. This requires developing self-compassion, forgiving oneself for past mistakes, and recognizing one's inherent worth. It is also important to surround oneself with supportive and encouraging individuals who can reinforce positive beliefs and help rebuild confidence. Overcoming the spirit of rejection is a process that requires time, patience, and perseverance. It involves breaking free from the chains of fear, self-doubt, and emotional isolation. As individuals learn to embrace their worth, accept love, and pursue their goals with confidence, they begin to break the hold that the spirit of rejection has over their lives. The journey is not easy, but it is one that leads to greater emotional freedom, healthier relationships, and the ability to live life with a renewed sense of purpose and self-acceptance. The impact of envy and jealousy. Envy and jealousy are not merely fleeting emotions. They are deeply spiritual poisons that infect the heart, distort perception, and open dangerous doors in relationships, communities, and even in spiritual warfare. These twin forces are often silent, slow-moving, and subtle. They don't always shout, sometimes they whisper, and yet their impact is profound and far-reaching. In fact, many betrayals, breakdowns in unity, family disputes, and even church splits can be traced not to major disagreements, but to the quiet, simmering presence of envy and jealousy left unchecked. Envy looks at what someone else has and silently declares, "That should be mine." It doesn't just want blessing, it resents the blessing of another. It doesn't just desire success, it questions why someone else was chosen to carry it. Jealousy, on the other hand, operates from a place of fear and possessiveness. It is the anxiety that someone is going to take what you believe belongs to you. These two spirits may come dressed in concern or even admiration, but underneath they are corrosive, they erode trust, they provoke division, and they push individuals to operate out of insecurity rather than purpose. What makes envy and jealousy especially dangerous is their tendency to camouflage themselves in relationships that are otherwise rooted in love. A sibling, a close friend, a mentor, or even a spouse can begin to harbor resentment when your progress triggers something unresolved in them. It doesn't always manifest immediately. Sometimes it appears in subtle comments meant to humble you, backhanded compliments, or growing silence in moments where celebration is appropriate. Other times it comes out more directly in sabotage, slander, or manipulation. These actions are not just emotional responses. They are spiritual tactics driven by unresolved wounds and unhealed insecurity. Envy and jealousy are not simply personal struggles. They are spiritual doors that invite manipulation, offense, and even witchcraft into a person's life. When someone allows envy to sit in their heart, it starts influencing how they speak, how they treat others, and even how they hear God. That person may begin to question divine assignments or covet someone else's calling, thinking that favor has skipped over them. But divine purpose is never duplicated. The anointing God gives one person is tailor-made for their assignment. When envy distorts vision, people start to compete with what they were meant to celebrate. And jealousy does not stop at observation, it provokes control. The jealous heart fears being replaced, ignored, or outshone, so it seeks to micromanage, to criticize, to contain. It wants to hold others hostage to its fear of being left behind. This spirit fuels toxic leadership, suffocating partnerships, and possessive friendships. It tells a lie that love is measured by how much control you can keep rather than how much freedom you can give. Many destinies have been delayed not because the enemy was powerful, but because someone close operated out of jealousy and found subtle ways to shut down forward movement. In ministry, in families, in teams, these spirits divide people who are supposed to be divinely aligned. They turn encouragement into competition. They replace admiration with accusation. And over time, they foster a culture of mistrust where no one feels safe to grow or shine. People start to shrink their light so others won't feel uncomfortable. Gifts are hidden, voices are silenced, and the Spirit of God is grieved because unity has been sacrificed at the altar of insecurity. But the most sobering truth about envy and jealousy is how they subtly rob the one who carries them. Instead of walking in the fullness of their own identity, people consumed by these spirits spend their lives measuring themselves against someone else's journey. They become reactive instead of purposeful. They celebrate only when they feel superior and mourn when someone else ascends. That's not freedom, that's bondage disguised as ambition. And that bondage spreads, because unspoken envy doesn't stay quiet forever. It eventually turns into action, and those actions begin to echo in decisions, relationships, and even spiritual outcomes. Understanding the spiritual weight of envy and jealousy is not about identifying enemies, it's about identifying inner strongholds. Because if these spirits are not discerned and dealt with, they begin to weave themselves into the fabric of community, disguised as wisdom, disguised as protection, but always working against the flow of divine favor. And so the conversation must continue, not just about the impact of envy and jealousy, but about the systems that allow them to remain undetected. Because to walk in authority, in calling, and in clarity, these spirits must be exposed for what they are, silent assassins of unity, purpose, and spiritual maturity. The danger of codependency. Codependency isn't just a psychological issue, it is a spiritual entanglement that often masquerades as loyalty, love, or compassion. On the surface, it may look like devotion, but underneath, it is an unspoken bondage where identity, worth, and direction become tethered to someone else's approval, emotions, or presence. And when that attachment is rooted in fear, guilt, or a distorted sense of responsibility, it opens the door for manipulation, burnout, and spiritual stagnation. Many people are trapped in relationships where they've handed over their authority without realizing it. They allow others to become the source of their joy, their validation, and their decision making. It starts small, a need to please, a fear of disappointing, an urge to fix someone. But slowly, the lines blur. The individual stops hearing for themselves, praying for themselves, or moving forward unless the other person permits it, emotionally, verbally, or spiritually. That is no longer love, that's codependency, and it's dangerous. This danger is especially deceptive when it's wrapped in good intentions. You want to help someone. You want to be there for them. You want to be dependable. But if your ability to function spiritually, emotionally, or mentally becomes enslaved to someone else's mood swings, wounds, or insecurities, you've stepped into a dynamic that God never called you to carry. God did not assign anyone to be someone else's emotional savior. That role is already filled. The Holy Spirit is the comforter, not you. And yet so many believers find themselves drained, frustrated, and spiritually dry because they've been pouring out into a relationship that constantly takes but never refills. Codependency is sneaky because it often